Hello and welcome to BusyWorks Beats. .com. Today I will show you how I used Serum and FL Studio to create the juiciest growl known to man. Sounds like this. Without the filtering, it sounds like this. Now before I go into the video, I just want to do a super short plug here. My new EP, Horizons EP, is out on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, Google Play, a bunch of platforms. Link to all those platforms are in the description, but this EP contains drum and bass, rhythm, death step, and melodic dubstep. SoundCloud and other links in the description. I really appreciate your support. Now I'm not going to say that this growl sounds like any growl from any specific artist just to get clicks on the video. I'm not going to do that. It sounds like AU5. So this growl has a lot of post-processing, which I will go over. As long as you have Serum and you have FL Studio, all of the plugins here are going to be completely free, so you don't have to worry about that at all. But this is the sound without any post-processing and without any sub. Pretty boring, I know. Now during a private lesson a couple days ago, I was talking to a student about sound design, especially in Serum. If you're interested in private lessons, there's a link in the description. But I was talking about how sound design nowadays is getting more and more complex and is relying more and more on the post-processing. It is now very easy to just create a really basic, really simple sound in Serum that does not have a lot going on. You can see there's not a ton going on in this patch, and then just make it so much better with post-processing. So I decided to kind of show that off in this tutorial right here. I was able to make a really juicy growl out of something that really wasn't that interesting. That's not that good. All I was searching for was just a good tonality for a growl, and I just used a default Serum wavetable. It's just Monster 7. So yeah, I threw in Monster 7. I brought it down a couple octaves. You can see I'm modulating the wavetable position and the bend minus right here with just this one LFO right here, and that's on 1/2 on envelope, and that's just crawling upward. I didn't want any weird, big modulation. I just wanted a basic upward noise. So I was able to kind of achieve that there. This is nothing complicated at all. Now in LFO 2, I just created this shape. This is also on envelope on 1/2, and this is going to be the pitch. All I did was I added it to the coarse pitch right here, and I just brought it up a little bit. It's like, 19, just anywhere around there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be exactly an octave. I actually prefer to go over an octave. But all I did was I left it in the middle for most of the modulation, and then I just dropped it down. That's just doing the pitch drop that you hear. That's all that's doing. And if you can use pitch bend in your growls, please do it. It makes it sound so much better, especially when you pitch it down in the end. So I just routed it through this filter. This is a high pass peak filter 12. You can just find it in the multis tab right there. And all I'm doing is the basic growl thing, anything you'd expect me to do with a growl. I just, with LFO 1 here, I modulated the cutoff up, which is this high pass, and I turned the resonance up a lot as well, so we get a lot of kind of formant action. And I'm also modulating the frequency down so we get this kind of movement. And that will give it that make it sound like it's roaring, growling, that's the vocal effect. I'm sure most of y'all know that. And also just bump up the drive a little bit, just to give it a little extra saturation in this filter. Into the effects section, I've just added these 3 things: EQing, distortion, and compression. I think those are the basic, 3 effects that you're going to add to any kind of bass. It's kind of universal. All the other effects I feel like are very specific to sounds. If you want to add a chorus, it wouldn't necessarily sound good on every sound. I feel like EQ, distortion, and compression are going to sound good at certain amounts in any sound. So with the EQ, all I did was I added this little notch. It's really just a little dip. It's not an actual notch filter. I just added this little dip right here, and I'm modulating the frequency back and forth. You can see what it's doing. That just adds to the vocal quality. It just takes away some kind of weird frequencies in the middle. It cleans it up a little bit. The distortion, just a little bit of soft clipping. I just bumped up the drive just below 50%. It's really simple. That's basic stuff. And I'm really driving it through the compressor here. I bumped the gain up a little bit, but the main things that I did was I brought the threshold way down and I turned the release way up. And especially with the release way up, you're not going to get the really messy artifacts at the end of a sound that you would usually get with a multi-band compressor. And it does the same thing with the OTT. If you turn up the time, if you add more time to the OTT, you aren't going to get the super messy artifacts at the end of the sound. I didn't want any of that, especially since I'm going to be going through a lot of compression later on in the effect chain. So that's literally all I did for this preset. It's like the most basic thing in the world. And then it is routed into this channel. So what's going on here? Let's take a look. We have an OTT, of course. I just brought the depth down. I left everything pretty much the same. I may have messed with the times. I don't use OTT that much, so I don't know how much of these things are default. You can just see what's going on here. Just squashing it even more, doing the basic OTT thing. And now the next part is a very important part, especially for growls. For these kind of growls, you'll always do this. I put a phaser on it. And a lot of producers do this on their growls. It makes it sound very, very hollow. You can see I brought the frequency, the sweep frequency right here, and the frequency range all the way down, as well as the feedback. You didn't want any feedback. I left most of these normal, except I made sure there was no stereo, and I set the minimum depth and the maximum depth up to somewhere around the same area right here. And this is just narrowing the field. This is making sure the phaser is not moving that much. You see these numbers are very, very close. And that means that it's in a small little range, so it's not going to be moving much at all. And the NR stages is basically like, if you were to see a phaser on like a phaser filter, that's going to be like how many notches it is. That's what it's doing to the sound, how many times it's phasing itself. So I set the NR stages to 7. I think it sounds pretty good. And I mixed it in right here, 50%. Now, if you're not using FL Studio 20, I do not suggest using this mix knob. You should probably use this dry wet knob right here. But with FL Studio 20, they added updates to these mix knobs, so you no longer get that really ringy sound when you're mixing in and out effects like this. So I just brought it down to 50. At 100%, it sounds like this. You can even see what the phaser's doing. You can hear it obviously, but you can see those little peaks in there. So I just wanted a little bit of that, brought it to 50%. It just adds more vocal quality, kind of shapes the sound. After that, OTT, pretty much the exact same thing, just driving it as, normal OTT is done. These OTT is also bringing out some like really high squelchy sound, especially at the very end. It just has this really wet kind of sound way up in the high end, and I really, really like it. Next up, we add a VOC Attack. This is where the fun begins. Now with the VOC Attack, I'm not doing too much complicated stuff here. I didn't go into any of these, the band width or the band distribution. I didn't mess with any of those. You don't really need to for this sound. It was just the band gain multiplier, which I was dropping the low end and bringing down some of the harsher frequency bands here. I set the band number to 7, so a very low band, and I just kept the order at 2. That's fine. You can mess around with the order. You can get some interesting stuff. This is not going to work for every growl. This is very specific. Like this one preset is not going to work for pretty much any of the other growls I've made. It just worked really well for this one. So I encourage you to mess around with VOC Attack and find the best possible kind of custom setup for your growl that you're doing. So you can see there's not a lot of bands. There's only a few bands in there, and they're very small. They're very squashed because I have this this bandwidth right here turned up, and I turned down the bandwidth multiplier a little bit because I didn't think it needed to be up that high. It can sound pretty weird if you drive it too high. I brought the formant down a little bit just to give it a little bit of a darker vowel. And here's something very important. I turned this voices, this unison, this little chorus thing up to 5, and I turned it all the way up. So if there's none, you can hear versus that, and then this. It can kind of smooth the waveform out a little bit. So I suggest doing that whenever it works. Sometimes it doesn't work, but if it works, I highly suggest doing it. I turn this from peak to RMS, and I turn these time variables down a good bit. They're pretty low. You don't need them very high, especially on RMS. RMS is much slower than the peak algorithm here. And I just make sure to flip on minimum times so it wouldn't clip. This minimum times means that you can turn all of these down as much as you want, but it will not clip. Now, if you turn off the minimum times and you were to turn it all the way down, then you would get some distortion. So I make sure to keep that on. The VOC Attack just makes it sound really, really juicy. But now we did lose a little bit of the fatness, so of course OTT yet again. Trust me, I'm not the only producer that does this. Once again, just basic OTT stuff, bring the depth down, maybe mess with the time. I still don't think I messed with many settings. It just keeps it fat. I want to maintain the fatness. Now here is where I would add my fat rack. I do this when I say fat rack because this is not a complex rack at all. There is not much going on here, but it makes such a big impact. Before I show it to you, I'll just play each sound before and after. This is before, and this is after. There's so much more power behind that, and all this is literally just a bunch of these dinky little plugins. This is Soft Clipper. This is Fruity Soft Clipper, completely free. And it's, I just made this really simple curve. This is just really fine saturation. This is just really subtle saturation that I have done 6 times. And what I did here was I split this up in Patcher, and in this Maximus, all I did was I just pulled up the Maximus and I soloed the high end on this one, I soloed the mid range on this one, and I soloed the low end on this one. So I have a triple band split. You could do this with an EQ. I just decided to use Maximus's algorithms because I felt like it would work a little better. It would be a little more even. And all I did was I took the lows, the mids, and the highs, and I ran them both through 2 soft clippers. They're all going through 2 soft clippers each. And all the soft clippers have this little preset in there that just has this little curve from corner to corner. And this simple little processing just makes it so fat. I love it so much. After all that, I'm gonna add a little bit of EQing, and this is where, there's a lot of harsh frequencies. There was a lot of harsh frequencies going on in this area, so I made sure those were controlled, and I boosted the mid to low ends, made sure to cut the sub. Now, I made a point to not cut the sub anywhere before the OTTs and the saturation, because I wanted the sub to go through all of that. When you put sub through saturation, it's going to distort the sub along with everything else, and that will add extra crunch. If I high passed it before any kind of distortion and stuff like that, it would not have, the frequency content that it has now. So I usually, unless the sub is extra strong and I don't need it to go through that much, I usually wait until after the saturation to high pass it. But after all that, we have, of course, lost a little bit of power, so I'm going to go back into Serum FX, which is free if you bought Serum. And I'm actually going to use this multi-band compressor. Now, this multi-band compressor is basically an OTT, but its algorithms are different. I feel like this one, you can get more loudness out of it and a little more power versus the OTT that will just like smush it down and completely flatten. It's a little bit different. And all I did here was I brought down the threshold a little bit, I brought up the gain, and I also brought up the release. So I'm not compressing too much of those fine artifacts like I was saying before. I wanted to just kind of preserve those a little bit. I didn't want to squash them too much. Very powerful once again. And after that, I just had to do the same thing. This is the same, just EQing. And when you put EQing between all of these compression and stuff like all this compression and saturation and things, it turns out much better than if you were to do all of that and then at the end put an EQ on it. So I think that's a good thing to do. This is the last EQ I have on this chain though. So I just made sure that the annoying frequency here was getting cut, and I rounded off this high end to sound a lot cleaner and more pleasing to the ear. And also, I added this little filter, and this filter is really nice. Like, I hear AU5. This is why I think it sounds like AU5. I hear AU5 using that low pass filter all the time. I was watching AU5 tutorials, and when he was making a growl, he liked to use a low pass filter to go in and out. And I think that adds a lot more movement and dynamics without just straight up controlling the volume. So for right now, I'm going to turn that off just so I can talk to you about this EQ right here, and I can show you what it's doing. But I like to keep that on. In a lot of situations, it sounds very, very good. But the high end now with that EQ is just a lot cleaner, and it's a lot more pleasing to the ear. After that, the final effect is a wave shaper, and I'm literally doing nothing here. Like, all this is doing is I wanted to keep it from peaking, because with this wave shaper, even though you can shape and add, all kinds of distortion and fun stuff, that I'd probably completely ruin the sound. But even though you can do all of that, I like to use the wave shaper sometimes and just leave it how it is, control the pregame. Because once it gets up to this little peak right here, I can actually make the wave shaper bigger. Once it gets up to this little peak right here, it is actually going to clip. Then you just have clip distortion. It's not going to go above that level. That's a hard clip. So this is just a really, really simple hard clip. So it'll clip at 0 dB, and I just wanted to keep it there in the effects section versus it clipping in this channel and then going clipping into the master. I didn't want to do that. I wanted just to add the digital clip instead of the analog clip. So that's all I'm doing right here. Just I just opened it up. That's all you need. And now let me turn the filtering on and let me add this little sub that I custom made in Serum. All this is an analog BD sign. Normally I'd add more stuff to my sub. I'd make it a little more intricate, but I just need something really basic. Add a little attack, little release. Sounds like this. And I kept the same pitch automation here. It's just doing the exact same thing. So that layered with the sound sounds like this. And this is a great example of, like I said, how you can make something very basic and, you know, very dumb sounding in Serum and turn it into something really, really juicy and super rich just with post-processing. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a thing or two. Now the link to the FLP and the Serum preset is down in the description below. You can go find that and just download that for free. Like I said before, if you are interested in private Skype lessons, link to the information about that is in the description as well. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.